This is a CBS News Special Report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in the nation's capital. The White House today taking a significant move, accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of invading the sovereign country of Ukraine. And this is arguably the most dangerous moment for Europe in a generation. And so in just moments from now, we will hear from the President of the United States. He has promised swift and severe punishment for Putin, and we expect him to announce harsh new economic sanctions. Earlier today, Germany made a major move against Russia by halting the $11 billion Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project that would carry natural gas from Russia to Germany. And that news sent gas prices soaring and stock markets around the world falling as the prospect of war in Europe looks more and more likely. As we await the president, let's bring in Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. And so, Nancy, what are you hearing about how severe these sanctions will be?
Well, Norah, we don't know whether the president will be announcing the mother load of sanctions packages that would basically cut off Western investment to Russia. We're hearing the president walk into the room now, so let's take a listen.
Well, good afternoon. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin recognized two regions of Ukraine as independent states. And he bizarrely asserted that these regions are no longer part of Ukraine and their sovereign territory. To put it simply, Russia just announced that it is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine. Last night, Putin authorized Russian forces to deploy into these regions. Today, he asserted that these regions are actually extend deeper than the two areas he recognized, claiming large areas currently under the jurisdiction of the Ukrainian government. He's setting up a rationale to take more territory by force, in my view. And if we listened to his speech last night, and many of you did, I know, he's setting up a rationale to go much further. This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma. So let's begin to, I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014. And if Russia goes further with this invasion, we stand prepared to go further as with sanctions. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law, and it demands a firm response from the international community. Over the last few months, we've coordinated closely with our NATO allies and partners in Europe and around the world to prepare that response. We've said all along, and I've told Putin to his face more than a month ago, that we would act together. And the moment Russia moved against Ukraine, Russia has now undeniably moved against Ukraine by declaring these independent states. So today, I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions to impose costs on Russia in response to their actions yesterday. These have been closely coordinated with our allies and partners and will continue to escalate sanctions if Russia escalates. We're implementing full blocking sanctions on two large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank. We're implementing comprehensive sanctions on Russian sovereign debt. That means we've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either. Starting tomorrow and continuing in the days ahead, we'll also impose sanctions on Russia's elites and their family members. They share in the corrupt gains of the Kremlin policies and should share in the pain as well. And because of Russia's actions, we've worked with Germany to ensure Nord Stream 2 will not, as I promised, will not move forward. As Russia contemplates its next move, we have our next move prepared as well. Russia will pay an even steeper price if it continues its aggression, including additional sanctions. The United States will continue to provide defensive assistance to Ukraine in the meantime, and will continue to reinforce and reassure our NATO allies. Today, in response to Russia's admission that it will not withdraw its forces from Belarus, I have authorized additional movements of U.S. forces and equipment already stationed in Europe to strengthen our Baltic allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Let me be clear, these are totally defensive moves on our part. We have no intention of fighting Russia. We want to send an unmistakable message, though, that the United States, together with our allies, will defend every inch of NATO territory and abide by the commitments we made to NATO. We still believe that Russia is poised to go much further in launching a massive military attack against Ukraine. Hope I'm wrong about that. Hope we're wrong about that. But Russia has only escalated its threat against the rest of Ukrainian territory, including major cities and including the capital city of Kyiv. There are still well over 150,000 Russian troops surrounding Ukraine. And as I said, Russian forces remain positioned in Belarus to attack Ukraine from the north, including warplanes and offensive missile systems. Russia's moved troops closer to Ukraine's border with Russia. Russia's naval vessels are maneuvering in the Black Sea to Ukraine's south, including amphibious assault ships, missile cruisers, and submarines. Russia's moved supplies of blood and medical equipment into position on their border. You don't need blood unless you plan on starting a war. Over the last few days, we've seen much of the playbook that Secretary Blinken laid out last week in the United Nations Security Council come to pass. A major increase in military provocations and false flag events along the line of contact in the Donbass. Dramatically staged, conveniently on-camera meeting of Putin's Security Council to grandstand for the Russian public. And now political provocation of recognizing sovereign Ukrainian territory as so-called independent republics in clear violation, again, of international law. President Putin has sought authorization from the Russian parliament to use military force outside of Russian territory. And this set the stage for further pretexts of further provocations by Russia to try to justify further military action. None of us should be fooled. None of us will be fooled. There is no justification. Further Russian assault in Ukraine remains a severe threat in the days ahead. And if Russia proceeds, it is Russia and Russia alone that bears the responsibility. As we respond, my administration is using every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers from rising prices at the pump. As I said last week, defending freedom will have cost for us as well and here at home. We need to be honest about that. But as we do this, I'm going to take robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours. We're closely monitoring energy supplies for any disruption. We're executing a plan in coordination with major oil-producing consumers and producers toward a collective investment to secure stability in global energy supplies. This will blunt gas prices. I want to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. In the last few days, I've been in constant contact with European leaders, including with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Vice President Harris met in person with the leaders in Germany over the weekend at the Munich conference, including President Zelensky. At every step, we have shown the United States and our allies and partners are working in unison, which he hasn't been counting on, Mr. Putin. We're united in our support of Ukraine. We are united in our opposition to Russian aggression. And we're united in our resolve to defend our NATO alliance. And we're united in our understanding of the urgency and seriousness of the threat Russia is making to global peace and stability. Yesterday, the world heard clearly the full extent of Vladimir Putin's twisted rewrite of history, going back more than a century, as he waxed eloquently, noting that, well, I'm not going to go into it, but nothing in Putin's lengthy remarks indicate any interest in pursuing real dialogue on European security in the year 2022. He directly attacked Ukraine's right to exist. He indirectly threatened territory formerly held by Russia, including nations that today are thriving democracies and members of NATO. He explicitly threatened war unless his extreme demands were met. And there is no question that Russia is the aggressor. So we're clear-eyed about the challenges we're facing. Nonetheless, there is still time to avert the worst-case scenario that will bring untold suffering to millions of people if they move as suggested. The United States and our allies and partners remain open to diplomacy if it is serious. When all is said and done, we're going to judge Russia by its actions, not its words. And whatever Russia does next, we're ready to respond with unity, clarity, and conviction. We'll probably have more to say about this as it moves on. I'm hoping diplomacy is still available. Thank you all very much.
The President of the United States saying this is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, so I am going to begin to impose sanctions in response, and the President not ruling out further action in defense of NATO. Let's bring in Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. And Nancy, what did you hear there from the President?
Well, Nora, we heard the president for the first time say that he believes that Russia has begun an invasion of Ukraine. Why is that significant? Well, first of all, because it shows that the U.S. believes that any movement into Ukraine, even if it is into territory that is currently controlled by Russian separatists, is a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. Beyond that, it shows that we are moving into a new phase of this conflict, away perhaps from diplomacy and towards threats coming from both sides, the U.S. imposing some sanctions today, but the president saying very clearly there are far more on the way if Russia moves further into Ukraine.
Stand by, Nancy. Let's bring in national security correspondent David Martin. He is at the Pentagon. And David, the president announcing additional troop deployments as well to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO. Explain the significance of that.
Well, these are troop movements within Europe. In other words, these are not reinforcements being sent to Europe from the United States. These are troops already stationed in Europe that will be forward deployed to the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, which are on the border with Russia. And these are just basically to serve as a tripwire to be there to reassure those countries that America will, in fact, fight to defend you if you are attacked. Earlier in this crisis, the president sent 5,000 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne to Poland, and they are there now. But they are not there to somehow prevent an invasion. They are there to deal with the consequences of an invasion of Ukraine, and specifically the prospect that tens of thousands or more civilians will come fleeing out of Ukraine across the border into Poland, and they will need to be processed and housed and fed until they can move on to some other place. So that is the status right now of U.S. forces. There are also another 8,500 on alert back here in the United States to further reinforce NATO if a full-scale invasion does take place. NATO has not yet requested those reinforcements.
David Martin at the Pentagon, thank you. Let's bring in senior foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata. He is in Ukraine's capital of Kyiv. And Charlie, the nation on a state of alert there with a number of government officials being moved further back from the border. Explain the state of play there.
Well, the real question tonight will be whether those sanctions will do anything to stop President Putin's war machine. I think Ukrainians will be in agreement with the president when he said that the invasion has already begun. That has been the case in that Donbass region to the east. The real concern now is whether we're going to see combat between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces in that region. Here in Kyiv, they're hoping it will be contained to the east. But what's concerning is the fact that President Putin got authorization from the Duma to use military force outside of Russia. That essentially sets the stage for Russian forces to widen its war in Ukraine. More concerning, as we just heard the president say, in their case, the worst case scenario, massive military attack, including the capital. At the moment, everybody's expecting an increase in fighting between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces, not Russian-backed separatists, but actual Russian forces, these so-called peacekeepers who've been brought into eastern Ukraine, and whether that's going to widen to further parts of Ukraine.
Charlie D'Agata in Kyiv, thank you. Let's return to Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. And, Nancy, the President of the United States is set to give his State of the Union address. He's set to announce a new Supreme Court justice pick. And now, of course, he is dealing with this Russian threat on the European continent. Explain what you're learning behind the scenes in terms of these steps, the sanctions that are now being issued. Is diplomacy dead? Will the Secretary of State meet with his Russian counterpart? Will the president even have that summit with Putin that was floated? Are those off the table?
The president said at the end of his remarks he hopes that diplomacy isn't dead. He hopes that talks can continue. At the same time, any type of summit between President Biden and President Putin had been floated last week appears to be off the table for now that Russia has actually entered Ukraine. Could the Secretary of State meet with his Russian counterpart later this week, at least telephonically as planned? We still don't know. Earlier today, a national security official said that was going to be up to the State Department to announce whether that phone call was on or off. There's no question the White House would rather deal with this diplomatically. So if they can keep those lines of communication open, they will. At the same time, the President of the United States is in constant contact with his European allies as they work to announce these sanctions in lockstep to send a powerful message to Putin that the entire West is arrayed against him.
It's a very important point, the president making that point that the West is united. You saw each of them step by step announcing new sanctions, not only the British government, the Germans, of course, with Nord Stream 2, the European Union cutting off travel restrictions and other for wealthy Russians, and now, of course, the President of the United States following. And as Charlie D'Agata noted, will it make a difference, and will Vladimir Putin blink tonight? We will be watching, and our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. Thanks to our correspondents and producers in the field. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.